UFC fighters have explained just how scary Sean O'Malley really is. In his first few years in the UFC, Sean O'Malley was an alleged can crusher who most people thought was just an overhyped entertainer.
Expose him for what he is, you know what I mean? A clown.
But that quickly changed when he started dismantling top-tier opponents, as well as 2 UFC champions, and gaining the bantamweight title in the process.
O'Malley isn't gonna be a star. He is a star.
Told everybody that he was a sniper, told everybody he was a sharpshooter. Told everybody eventually he's gonna make a mistake and I'm gonna put him down. And then he goes out and does it. I mean, it was really something special.
He's got the potential to go down as the greatest bantamweight the sport has ever seen.
Sean O'Malley first burst onto the scene through Dana White's Contender Series, where he knocked Alfred Kashakian out cold with a monstrous right hand to have both the man in charge buzzing with excitement, as well as Snoop Dogg going crazy in the commentary booth.
O'Malley! Oh yeah! O'Malley! Welcome to the Sugar Show! This is my show!
Alright man, the skinny boys is in the house, man.
Sean's big win on Dana White's Contender Series earned him a shot at the UFC, where after a couple of decision victories, he showcased his true talents by knocking out Jose Quinones and following it up by sending Eddie Wineland to the Shadow Realm with a brutal right hand. There were a few who started believing in O'Malley, like Gilbert Burns, who said, "If you didn't believe me, now you have to. Sean O'Malley is real." In his very next fight, O'Malley's hype train was put on halt after Marlon Vera destroyed his perineal nerve, making it impossible for Sean to stay on his feet. Once Sugar went down, Vera rained down thudding elbows to finish the job. Henry Cejudo wasted no time in making the most of O'Malley's momentary downfall, as he said, "I fought Demetrius Johnson and Marlon Moraes with no legs. This 2-pump chump broke his nail and can't compete." O'Malley responded to his critics by saying that his loss was simply an accident.
I watched it in slow motion. His toe, his Ecuadorian toe, hit my peroneal nerve right here. It shut my foot off. My foot was completely numb. I was still piecing his ass up. Like, I was out striking him with one foot. I blitzed him. Shouldn't have done that. My foot wasn't working. Blitzed him, hit him with like a 3-piece combo. Went to step back on my foot, but my foot didn't work. I fell down. Fight's over.
Despite numerous explanations, O'Malley was accused of making excuses, but he bounced back with a string of victories against Thomas Almeida and Chris Moutinho. Moutinho in particular wasn't even in the UFC when he was offered to fight O'Malley on short notice, and as expected, he got beaten from pillar to post. O'Malley still didn't get the credit he deserved, as most praised the debutant Moutinho, who survived a good 14 minutes despite being given little chance. Interestingly, while Moutinho earned praise for being tough as nails, O'Malley was criticized for battering another unranked can. None of it made sense to the Montana native, especially when he was unranked too.
They say, "Oh, you didn't pick on a ranked opponent for a replacement." It's like, I got offered 0. I've never been offered a ranked opponent, ever. I've never fought a ranked, I think Cheeto when he was 15 or something. Never fought a ranked. I'm not ranked. People are mad. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to tell people.
O'Malley followed up with a KO win against Raulian Paiva before entering the UFC Bantamweight top 15 and secured a top 10 matchup in the form of Pedro Munoz, but unfortunately the fight was ruled a no contest due to eye pokes. After a disappointing end to the biggest fight of his career, O'Malley received an even bigger offer from the earlier trash talker and former champion Henry Cejudo.
Hey Sean,
I didn't see that.
you want a matchup if he's right here? I'd love a tune-up. What do you say, Precious?
Serious?
What do you say?
Are you you're good to go now,
Yeah,
huh?
I'm good to go.
Say it.
When would you want to bend the knee at what time? Because I think you absolutely suck.
However, instead of getting a Cejudo matchup, O'Malley sent the MMA world into a frenzy by accepting a fight with former champ and cerebral assassin in the form of Petr Yan. O'Malley's critics were over the moon that he finally accepted a fight against someone who was supposed to smash him.
Most likely Jan's going to be able to run through him.
Even Yan underestimated his rival, calling him a UFC project.
Sean is a UFC project and a Conor wannabe.
Not only that, Yan thought that he was the better fighter by a mile.
Do you feel skill-wise like he is on your level?
I don't think we're on the same level. I believe I'm better fighter than him and in all aspects, you know.
When the cage door closed, most MMA fans and most importantly, Yan quickly realized that O'Malley was much better than he and many expected. The American went toe-to-toe with the Russian, hurting him a few times in what turned out to be an absolute war. The fight was razor close, but after 3 intense rounds, O'Malley emerged victorious by a split decision. That's when people started realizing that O'Malley wasn't just a can crusher, he was the real deal.
Whew, that was a crazy one. He was certainly in it against Petr Yan, who was a former champion, one of the best in the division by far, the #1 contender. It was a very close fight, and he definitely hurt Petr in multiple occasions. Caught him with that big knee, rocked him.
Yan complained after the fight that he was robbed, but Dana White begged to differ.
Did you think O'Malley won? How did you score it?
It was one of those razor-thin, close fights. I could see people saying Yan won the fight. I could see people saying O'Malley won the fight.
O'Malley was just happy to prove his doubters wrong.
I mean, I'm sure there's still people out there, but I think I answered, kick his legs was the first one. Now it was, well, you can't just kick his legs. We'll take him down. Petr kicked my legs, took me down, still won. So, I mean, yeah, I'm answering questions little by little.
That night, O'Malley had crushed the narrative that he was weak and he would choke under pressure.
I thought Yan was going to get it, but I tell you what an unbelievable fight. Suga Sean O'Malley showed a lot of things tonight. He answered a lot of questions. Number one, he showed that he can have the ability to bite down on his mouthpiece, to be in an actual real fight, an absolute slugfest, back and forth action.
Even reigning champion Aljamain Sterling was blown out of the water.
I always acknowledge, Sean has had serious skill. I acknowledge that. We don't know how tough he is. We don't know when he's the hammer. When he's the hammer, we know he's really, really good. We didn't know if he becomes the nail and has some pushback, will he fold? And he showed he belonged.
Sterling even admitted that O'Malley would be a seriously tough matchup for him, given his supreme movement and powerful striking.
If you think that I can fight O'Malley and it's going to be like, oh, it's just going to be that easy, it's not. If you think I'm going to just run through him, I'm not. I could, but it doesn't mean that I definitely will.
But when the UFC booked O'Malley for his next fight against the champ for the bantamweight title at UFC 292, Sterling's attitude took a 180-degree turn.
My thoughts on Sean O'Malley is that motherfucker is frail. Frail. You think if I could take down a short, stocky guy like Henry, who's actually a gold medalist and has good takedown defense, what am I going to do to Sean O'Malley? Let's be honest here, guys.
Heading into their battle at UFC 292, most fans and professionals backed Sterling to win, giving his grappling prowess. On fight night, O'Malley showed a highly underrated aspect of his game, his elite takedown defense. Not only did he defend all of Sterling's takedown attempts, but he also knocked him into another dimension with a counter right, followed by ground and pound early in round 2 to win the belt. After that performance, the first one to admit that O'Malley was really, really good was the former champion himself.
It sucks. I mean, I'm not going to lie about that. There was a lot coming into this fight. The quick turnaround, everything. But I was happy to do it. No excuses. Sean, he did a good job of the one thing I knew he would be good at, and is that step back counter. And it's just a good shot, man.
And even O'Malley's biggest hater was also finally impressed by him.
Aljamain respected me so much, it's almost like he blew his wad on me and he kind of didn't give Sean O'Malley that respect that he deserved. I mean, what can I say? I mean, the dude won. The dude won.
O'Malley also started to get recognition as the best striker in the bantamweight division.
Sean O'Malley, man, I think he's up there, one of the best strikers in you could even say UFC. He's right up there. But especially in that division, there's so many. That's a stacked division, man. Your Sandhagens, obviously Petr Yan's, Aljamain's, Cheetos, all of them, Pedro, all of them. There's so much talent. Man, it is a stacked division. And I think he's up there with one of the best when it comes to striking.
Chael Sonnen said that O'Malley's performance against who many thought was a terrible matchup was special.
I'm talking about O'Malley here, right? This was such an interesting match. He gets into the second round, told everybody that he was a sniper, told everybody he was a sharpshooter, told everybody eventually he's going to make a mistake and I'm going to put him down. And then he goes out and does it. I mean, it was really something special.
And for UFC legend Demetrius Johnson, it was O'Malley's gifted ability to find chins that won him the title.
He finds a chin, he puts you to sleep, and that's what happened. So once again, shout out to Suga Sean O'Malley for an amazing performance.
Despite making most of the MMA community bow down, O'Malley still had his doubters, and with the biggest one being Marlon Vera, the only man to beat O'Malley up until that point.
I know how strong I am, I know how good I am, and to be honest, I just feel that I'm gonna make him quit. I feel I'm gonna break him and just give him a reason to go home.
After winning the belt in spectacular fashion, O'Malley was expected to defend it against #1 contender Merab Dvalishvili, but the champ prioritized a rematch against Vera to redeem himself after the perineal nerve situation, and the UFC was more than happy to oblige, locking the rematch at UFC 299. Obviously in their first fight, it was Vera's lead leg low kicks that ended O'Malley, so that was a big talking point heading into the rematch. The champ, however, promised that lightning wouldn't strike twice.
You can kick my legs all he wants, but my leg's gonna be on his chin, so.
Chito's response was short and sweet.
The noise.
At UFC 299, there were no hiccups for the champ. O'Malley destroyed Vera for 5 rounds, landing 232 significant strikes to Vera's 89, and badly damaged him with a knee to the face and a big punch in round 5 to earn both a comfortable decision win as well as the praise of the MMA community. O'Malley's victory over Vera turned most of his critics into his fans, as many went as far as saying he was the best bantamweight on the planet, who proved that his loss to Vera was a fluke because he's levels above the Ecuadorian.
He told us that the first fight was a fluke because he was piecing Cheeto up. It wasn't as evident as it was tonight. Tonight it was very clear that Sean O'Malley was piecing Cheeto up because that's exactly what he was doing. He fought beautifully. You know, he was presented a canvas and he painted a masterpiece. His striking is next level.
In fact, some said O'Malley has the potential to surpass the likes of Dominic Cruz, TJ Dillashaw, and Aljamain Sterling to go down as the greatest bantamweights of all time.
The crazy thing about O'Malley is that he is getting better every single time that we see him. When he steps foot in the octagon, he's better than the last version that we saw. When he knocked out Aljamain Sterling, was that a lucky shot? Didn't look very lucky, but he just performed like that over 5 rounds over Chito Vera. He's something special, and he's got the potential to go down as the greatest bantamweight the sport has ever seen.
The next time O'Malley enters the cage, he'll be fighting the machine Merab Dvalishvili, a wrestling phenom with cardio for days. But Merab believes he doesn't even need to play his strengths to beat the champ. He'll simply knock him out.
I can knock him out, O'Malley. I believe so.
However, despite exuding confidence, Dvalishvili is fully aware of the tough challenge that lies ahead.
O'Malley's a good fighter. That's why I want to fight against him. You know, I want to challenge myself since 2018. And now it's perfect time. It's happened right time. You know, I always want to fight him, but now I think this is the best time.
It is arguably the toughest matchup of O'Malley's career, but there are solid reasons to believe that he'll overcome the Georgian as well, according to Corey Sandhagen, who thinks O'Malley's distance management and angles are going to be tough for Merab to deal with.
It's going to be a hell of a fight for the both of them, to be honest. I definitely know that Merab's biggest issue in fighting is clearing that gap. He isn't the fastest guy in the world. He doesn't have a build that clears the gap really well. He kind of gets people tired, and then that gap becomes a lot easier to close. But O'Malley is one of the best at hitting people in that void and in that space in between me and you, and it's gonna be a really challenging fight for the both of them.
Robert Whitaker believes O'Malley is a bad matchup for Dvalishvili because of his spacing, angles, and creativity.
I think Sean's spacing and just his creativity, and not to mention Sean has the entire skill set, the entire arsenal. If you think he's not like going to be working straight line attacks, like that lead knee he did against Vera after he threw it in the third or the fourth. He threw it in the third, and that was only after he saw Vera shelling up and putting his head down. That was an adjustment on the move. If you don't think he's going to be working things like that for Merab, you're kidding yourself.
O'Malley and Dvalishvili will square off at UFC 306, and if the champ passes yet another tough test with flying colors, he will most likely face another tough test in the form of number 2 ranked Umar Nurmagomedov, who recently secured the biggest win of his career against Corey Sandhagen. When asked who he prioritizes to face between O'Malley and Dvalishvili, here is what Umar had to say.
I don't want to name one guy or the other guy because I don't want the other guy to think that I'm trying to avoid fighting him.
That said, Umar doesn't really like the way O'Malley carries himself. The Dagestani is actually ashamed that he fights in a division in which Sean is the champ.
I'm ashamed we have Sean O'Malley champion, you know?
You said you're shamed?
Shame.
You're ashamed that he's the champ?
Yes, yeah, I think it's shame.
Why?
You see, men have to be different. Men, it's about different things. It's not just about you make some funny stuff. You have to be good example for young generation, and you have to do something like men, not like clown.
Like what?
Like clown.
With guys like Umar Nurmagomedov waiting for their chance at gold, how long will O'Malley's reign last? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, check out times where Sean O'Malley punished cocky guys for being disrespectful.